Yeah, so welcome back and sorry about that. So I guess we need to start. So first of all, what was the problem? Well, actually, I'm not sure. So we basically just restarted the equipment, and it now seems to work. So let's start again. So welcome to the show, Samir. We are going to talk about longevity today. So where are we even?
We're currently at the SoCraTes Conference in Soltau, northern Germany. So, which I'm very much enjoying. I think this is my like sixth or seventh time here, and I like this kind of conference. It's very much open discussion, lots of communication, lots of ideas being thrown around, and very little one person standing in front of a lot of people talking, which is my least favorite kind of event. so, which might seem ironic on this, but I really like the interactive nature of this kind of streaming session as well. We get to actually hear from people who are interested and respond, right?
Yeah, and can point out that you're having sound problems, for example.
Oh, that's very helpful.
Yeah, of course. It would be even better if there were suggest any solutions. Have you tried switching it off and on again? So and just to talk a little bit about SoCraTes. So yesterday we had the World Cafe where we were walking around and scribbling some ideas on tables and moving around in different rooms. And there was even a session about meditation and another one about a code cutter where people would practice coding. And today we set up in the marketplace the whole agenda for the conference. So people were just suggesting sessions. This is one of them. And there will be a session about blindfolded coding, I think. So coding without looking at the code, without seeing anything at all. So that I thought was an interesting session. Any session that you want to
That
join?
one definitely jumped out at me. That one is by Romeo Mura, who's generally putting surprising things up on the wall and confusing all of us, which I really enjoy. Uh, no, I like to just float between rooms. I wandered into Aki Salmi's empathy session this morning, empathy at work, and was very surprised to hear lots of things I had never heard before about how to interact with people. And generally, I'm not so great at picking up on other people's emotions, and like lots of useful techniques for figuring out how your colleagues might be feeling. Uh, but I wasn't expecting to even be in that room. Like I just wandered in because it sounded interesting, right? Uh, I like to sit at the coffee bar, and we a few of us bring our coffee equipment, and we make specialty coffee for whoever shows up. And usually that also results in very, very good conversations, mostly about coffee, but also about software.
Yeah, and that was another session that you suggested. So
Yeah.
that's basically the conference that we're talking about.
Mhm.
So yesterday there was the foundation day, and that was the day of workshops, and you gave a workshop about longevity.
Yes.
So how did that work out? Did you?
I had a lot of fun. We had some technical problems, which is unfortunate. It's the first time I was running it, so unfortunately this happens. Because we were using an online editor, and it turns out online editors come with a lot of caveats. But as for the workshop itself, I think it was very successful. People seemed to have fun. I definitely had fun. I was trying to simulate, uh, you know, multiple years of work in a couple of hours, which is always a challenge. One of the issues I have with software workshops is we can work in, on little projects, or we can take a project we don't understand and maybe do a little bit of refactoring. But what we can't do is emulate lots of real world conditions. Like, for example, the colleague who wrote this piece of code and understands it thoroughly retired last year. That's hard to simulate in a workshop, right? So that's what I was trying to do. So there, I will probably give some spoilers as the workshop, but I have no plans to actually run it again soon. So maybe anyone who's watching this stream and would like to run it for themselves, I will, I explain how it works, and maybe they can do it themselves. But briefly, I get people to write some code. I give them a deadline, which is very tight, like 10 minutes, so that they write maybe not code they're particularly proud of. And then I get them to rotate pairs. So, half, like when they're pairing, like half the people move clockwise. And then so half the people are working are familiar with the problem, but unfamiliar with the solution that they're presented with. And then I give them a new requirement, and we go from there. It's in an attempt to show people what it's like when you're presented, with unfamiliar code and what problems jump out at them. Go on, sorry.
No, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
I think the key takeaway a lot of people had was if you don't start with a strong foundation, write some unit tests, have solid infrastructure. Honestly, it doesn't matter exactly what it is, but fast feedback, a way to verify that the software you're working on actually works very quickly. It could be manual testing. If you can be fast enough with your manual testing, you're going to have a bad time in the long run, right? And having that stable infrastructure really helps.
Yeah, so I just noticed that we were actually skipping a few interesting points. So are you available to do the workshop for customers, or?
In theory, yes. I have not. I mean, I have a full-time job, but I think they'd be very happy if I went places and ran workshops. I don't think they'd object. And this is something I'm getting back into because, well, we've just had 3 years of me not traveling very much, like a lot of us.
Yeah.
So I would like to run a lot more workshops and go to more conferences and things like this. So.
And you're also looking for programmers or developers, right?
Yes. So I work at a company called Hasura. We are hiring Haskell developers, Go developers, TypeScript developers, developers who don't fit into any of those categories, but like working on fun things to work on a GraphQL engine, which effectively is middleware between your backend and your front end.
Yeah, sounds quite interesting, and I thought it was interesting to see that you're actually using Haskell, because back when I was studying, it seemed like only academics would do that, but seeing that in real life is great.
I think this is highly related to the longevity point. Haskell is a interesting language for many reasons. It has a lot of mathematical foundations, but one of the things I think is only just coming into the mainstream, which Haskell's had for, 30 years, is the ability to easily and tersely model your core domain without worrying about interactions with the outside world, right? So you're encouraged to express everything as a data structure, and then build functions around it, which can convert it to JSON or push it over the network, etc. But your domain is pure, and it enforces this strong decoupling, which can lead to code that lasts a long time.
And we are also missing. So the other advertisement that I wanted to make is, so there is the Agile Meets Architecture Conference. So that's another interesting conference, and that's going to be on September 6th and 7th. It's going to be done by us, by InnoQ, and there is a promo code SAS_10. SAS is in software architecture in stream, _10 for 10% off. So if you want to join that conference, that would also be that's also something. So after we had this, we got this out of the way. So your workshop was about longevity. Is there any kind of definition for that term?
I don't know. I like it. I've not really heard anyone else using it. I'm sure there are other people using this term, but I don't know who those people are. I think it captures an interesting property of software, which is that we often, if it's successful, expect software to last for quite some time. And this is variable, but I think most successful software, we want it to last longer than the programmers who worked on it, right? Programmers switch jobs pretty often. Not all programmers do, but many programmers move jobs after 1 or 2 years. I often do. And I think, and it will be a real shame if we had to delete all that code just because the 2 people who originally authored it left, right? So we want to avoid that. So I think it's an interesting property which we don't discuss enough.
Yeah. So it seems that you're in a way saying that this is a social problem, as soon as people leave, then this becomes a problem. Would you agree? So is it more a technical problem, or is it a social problem?
I think it's a socio-technical problem.
Oh, I see. Okay.
I think you are correct, right? It's both. And it's not just about people leaving. For example, we like to pile feature on top of feature on top of feature, and often, if we built a house 1 story at a time, it would not go so well. But this is what we do with software a lot of the time. We build the first floor, and then we ship it, and then we build the second floor, and then we ship it, and that can end badly. What we're discussing here is both thinking about what happens when people, like the knowledge, not so much the people, but the stuff inside their brain leaves the organization or leaves the team.
Mhm.
And we're also thinking about what happens when we build things on unstable foundations. And how do we stabilize those foundations at the right time? Because it's not always sensible to, I don't know, invest a year in a stable foundation when we don't even know if this product will succeed, right?
Which leads me to the next question. So, I honestly think that architecture is always about trade-offs. So, the question is, and obviously, if you aim for longevity, there is other stuff that you don't aim for. So, when would you not aim for longevity?
Oh, I mean, there's plenty of reasons, right? If I tried to build a startup, it did not go so well, but I think we learned a lot of valuable lessons. And one of those was until you have customers, for example, it probably doesn't matter if your software is falling apart all the time, because until you have customers, you have no idea if anyone wants your product. I would definitely not encourage anyone to worry too much about making the software last 1,000 years when you don't even know if anyone wants it, right? It can be fun. I particularly like refactoring, and but we don't often need to just polish and tidy up the code if there's no reason to. I also think one useful heuristic I like to use, it's not always the case, is that I found that when code changes often in the past, it is probably going to be the same code changing in the future. This isn't always the case. I think Marco Emmerich mentioned yesterday that Adam Thornhill in his book,
Your code is a crime scene.
Code is a Crime Scene, thank you, has shown that this is not always the case, but definitely in the projects I've worked in, I've seen it. So when refactoring, I tend to, or when preemptively refactoring, when anticipating future changes, I tend to focus on the areas where I have seen lots of changes in the past for two reasons. One is I expect more changes in the future, and so I want to prepare the code to accept those changes. I probably also have a better idea of what those changes might be because I've seen stuff coming in the past, and therefore I know which direction to push the code in. If I see a completely new change coming out of left field where I wasn't expecting it, it doesn't matter how much refactoring I did because I probably didn't anticipate the correct change.
So that leads to the question. So how do I make a code base long lasting? And one thing that you already mentioned is that you should aim for high quality. It seems in areas where usually there are a lot of changes. Is there anything else that you would aim for? Any other techniques to make code more long lasting?
I think quality is a useful metric, but it's very nebulous. It's very hard to define. I really like Dan Nort's Cupid properties that he published about earlier this year. And I think the core one for me is composability. If we can structure our code as as a sequence or as a graph of smaller things that are composed together, this allows us to do two things. I think the less important one is being able to recompose it in different ways. I've heard a lot of people talk about composability as a way to, build new things out of old modules, and I think that is possible, but harder than you think. But the real key is that it makes it easier to delete code, because I can look at a module that works well in isolation, is tested in isolation, and just delete the whole thing and replace it with something with the same API. But that does something slightly different. And this allows me to work on that area of the code and evolve it without having to worry about breaking everything else in my code base. Now, the other the other properties in Cupid are also very relevant to this. But for me, I'm thinking a lot about composability and coupling and cohesion.
Okay, and by the way, there was an episode that I did with Dan about Cupid. So that's and I will put the link in the description.
I'm sure Dan will explain this way better than I can.
Yeah, actually, he was talking a lot about how this is different from Solid, and I'm not sure whether you know that, but it started as a tongue-in-cheek thing.
Yes.
So I found that quite interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So are you saying that besides so high quality is one thing in particular parts, and then it seems like composability leads to replaceability of specific parts of the system. That seems to be the other thing that you said, right?
Yes, I think it helps.
Right.
There's a maxim, I think, that I can't even remember who wrote this post, but there's a post called "Write code that is easy to delete, not easy to extend." The idea being that when we build code when we are building up code over with many layers over lots of time, it tends to become creaky, just as if you were building, if you were doing, let's say, real architecture. If you're building a house, we add things over time. It tends not to work as fluidly as if we had designed it from the beginning. Whereas if we can take a component of our software, a module, a microservice, whatever it might be, and be able to say, I'm going to make a new component, and using, I don't know, the Strangler Fig pattern or something else, replace that component gradually with new code that better meets our new expectations, we can keep ourselves in a fairly healthy place.
So I find that interesting. I mean, I couldn't agree more that it's important to be able to delete code.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, at the end of the day, the title of the session is, or of your workshop, is longevity.
Yeah.
So in a way, you're trying. How do I say it? You're trying to achieve longevity by deleting code. That's like a
Right.
contradiction in itself, right? It's like almost like an
Right,
oxymoron.
because code is not our asset, right?
Okay.
We care about code because we are software developers and we have an emotional attachment to it, but the code is not the asset. In fact, code is probably a liability, right? Less code, probably more useful than more code. The asset is either your product itself or the customer base or the, I don't know, whatever your product hopes to achieve. That's what people are paying you for. It's not because you wrote 10 lines of code today. Your customers probably, not in all cases, but probably don't care about that. And so I don't care about longevity of any particular line of code. I care about the longevity of the product and its customer base and its revenue.
Which in a way says that it's more than the code. It's more like the experience that people get. But as you said pretty early, that one of the risks that you have is people leaving.
Right.
So how do you? Is there anything besides the code base that people need to share, or any way to also make sure that this experience isn't lost when people are leaving the company?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a good solution for you, but I think it's incredibly important. Alistair Coburn wrote a paper, I don't know, 20 years ago or something, and I can't remember the exact title, but it was something like people as first order components in software systems, where it's like it turns out the people are the people contributing to the software, not just programmers, but designers, product managers, whoever contributes to the software in some way. Even your customer is the most important part of your software system. You can reconstruct the software from the knowledge that is in people's heads and their communication style and things like this. And we need when someone leaves the team, it's not just that their ability to program has gone away, or their ability to design, or their ability to, I don't know, test. It is more important, like all their tacit knowledge, everything that was in their brain that they couldn't quite express, but they knew subconsciously, has also gone away. And handing that over is pretty much impossible. So if we can find ways to reduce our bust factor in some way by, for example, pair programming, right? I think it's a really valuable technique to ensure that the knowledge is never in one person's head. There's a programming technique where, pair programming technique where the person with the knowledge is not allowed to touch the keyboard. They must express it using their words. And then the other person codes, right? So I think this is really valuable. I think it's far more valuable when you pair with people who are, when a programmer is pairing with someone who is not a programmer. When a programmer is pairing with a tester, or a programmer is pairing with a business analyst, this can be even more valuable because you don't just have the different knowledge about the same thing, but you have different knowledge about different things, or different understandings of the problem coming together. I have enjoyed pairing most when I pair with product people, for example, because they understand the product far deeper than I do, and I understand the code far better than they do. So if I can get them to express something so concretely that I can actually type it into an editor and compile it, I know that we have reached a very good understanding collectively of the product.
Okay, so you ran that workshop yesterday, and I
Yep.
mean, as you mentioned, what we're talking about is like an experience or a problem that you only have if you develop software in the long run.
Yep.
And how do you run that workshop? How do you make sure that people actually take away the things that you said and sort of experience them even themselves? So how do you do that?
Yeah. I think it didn't. I wouldn't say it was 100% successful yesterday. I need to refine it a little. But one thing that I think a lot of people took away was I made half the people rotate, right? And if I had had more time, I probably would have done it a couple more times. Uh, and therefore, people were working on code that was completely unfamiliar to them, even if even though they just wrote effectively the same
Mm.
code themselves 10 minutes ago. And a lot of people recognized either that they had done something on their previous iteration, which would have been really valuable in this new code base. For example, modeling the domain explicitly as opposed to just using strings and numbers. I was getting people to do a variant of the shopping cutter, where you have to put apples and bananas and cherries into a basket and then
Mm.
create the total. So people recognized things they did which would have been useful in this new code, or the opposite. They came to a new code base and went, "Oh, if I had done this in the last one, it would have been way more useful." And I asked people to invent requirements that would completely invalidate their assumptions. This is what we did at the end of the workshop. So, for example, a lot of people had hard coded the list of items that you could put in your
Mm.
shopping cart, and of course, in a real supermarket, this is you don't hard code the list of
Mm.
items because it changes daily. Uh, so it would completely invalidate their assumptions in their code. So they know that if they have some time to go and tidy their code, and they know that's probably a useful direction to go in because they understand the domain well enough to make assumptions about what might happen in the future, to be able to predict the future a little better. And I wasn't expecting this, but a really useful insight from the workshop was the more domain expertise you have, the better.
So that's clearly a takeaway, and I think the way that you illustrated that with the hard-coded list of items, I think that's a very good way to put that or to get that. I'm not sure whether I understood the thing about the rotation. I mean, usually there is one code base that a company works on,
Yep.
and that is the code base.
Yep.
So what's the takeaway from the rotation?
Oh,
Why did you do that?
I mean, just because the company has one code base doesn't mean I'll work at one company for my entire life. And so often we have half the programmers on a team being very new to the code, and being able to jump in very easily and make changes with some kind of safety net, with the ability to change one thing and not worry about breaking 10 other things. This will be like, it means the code the code will maybe not last longer, but the product can last longer. Otherwise, we have this effect where over time we become slower and slower to ship features, not just because there's more code to maintain on top of that, but also because every feature becomes an opportunity to break 12 other features or 100 other features. And when you introduce new people to the mix who do not understand the complicated relationship between feature A and feature B, even though you would think they were completely unrelated, they are much more likely to break things, and therefore they have to do, I don't know, a lot more manual testing, for example, which can lead to either the product stagnating, so it's very hard to ship features, or often I've seen it a lot especially in banking, a complete rewrite of the entire software system every 5 to 10 years.
And how would you avoid that? I mean, okay, so I experienced that by rotation, so by getting new people joining the team, or
Yep.
in that simulation, getting new people to join the team. But what is the solution that you advise?
I'm not proposing a solution. I think that's really important. But I think things that can help include, for example, modeling the domain explicitly in your code, so that when the environment around you
Mm.
changes, your core stays very stable. If you can model the problem as opposed to modeling a particular solution, problems change a lot less often than solutions. Investment banking, for example, hasn't really changed in the last 20 to 30 years, but the approaches that investment banks take to facilitate
Mm.
trades changes, I don't know, yearly. And I mean, currently I'm working on a project which is middleware between your backend and your front end. We are very, very tied in to GraphQL as a solution, but we are working to make sure that our platform is still, 75% sensible, even if we take away one of those core requirements and replace it with a different core requirement. Because I mean, I like GraphQL. I think it's a really awesome protocol for transmitting data, but someone will probably come up with something even better at some point soon, right? Because that's the nature of technology.
And you're factoring that in. So do you have like
We
a list of change scenarios that you want?
We are thinking about it. So you have to do your risk analysis, right? And we think this is pretty low risk. We're not putting a lot of effort into it, but I just bring it up because I guess it's an easy example. Yes, you need to understand the risk of things changing out from under you. I don't know. That was terrifying. I've worked at companies where they were very, very terrified of AWS disappearing. And so they needed to make sure they could work with multiple cloud providers. I think this is very unlikely. You probably don't. AWS is probably going to last longer than your startup, right?
Yeah.
I think it's in the high nines, right? 99.99% more likely to last than your startup, right? So probably don't worry about being able to switch cloud providers so often. But you might rely on something that's a little more ephemeral. I don't know, a specific device driver that might go away in a few years, and then isolating your code from that a little more can help a lot. And I don't know if I'm answering your question because I got distracted by a weird noise over there.
Yeah, some evil ghost leaving the building. Maybe that was the reason why we had those sound problems.
Could be.
So anyway, so in a way, what you're saying is that you should think about the risk and try to sort of predict the future, but think about the future and possible scenarios. That seems quite logical to me. So why do you think are people not doing that? And in particular, I mean, you gave an example with AWS where people are actually optimizing for the wrong thing. So how do you tackle that problem? What's your opinion? Why this is not
explicit
happening?
risk analysis can help a lot. Like we have the expression problem talks about it being very making your code flexible in one dimension can often make it inflexible in another dimension.
Right.
So the expression problem explains that if you take an approach to modeling where you have, for example, Java interfaces, it's very easy to add a new subtype to your interface. I don't know. I'm trying to think of a good example. You have apples and bananas and cherries, right? They're all fruit. But adding a new method to your interface is hard because then you have to go and change every implementation, right? And if you use data classes instead, or Haskell's ADTs or whatever, it makes it very easy to add new functions. So we have apples, bananas, cherries as a union type. It makes it very easy to add a function that can deal with this data structure. I can add as many functions as I want. But if I add a new value to the union, then I have to go change all those functions, right? So the expression problem is showing us that in introducing flexibility in one dimension, we reduce flexibility in another dimension. I think this applies at a much higher level as well. It's very, very, very difficult to make code that is flexible in all dimensions, and social as well as technical. You probably have to optimize for a couple. If you make your code infinitely flexible in all dimensions, I think it will also hit infinite size, which might be a different problem, right? So we have to pick and choose what kind of changes we are expecting and make the code flexible along those lines. This is going to be different for every single code base. I can't tell you how to do that, but what you can do is look at the past and use your understanding of the domain, which is why it's probably important that software developers actually do understand the domain to understand how the code should be oriented to better accommodate changes in the future without too much churn.
And why do you think is that not happening more frequently? What is people keeping what is people keeping from doing that?
I think there is probably a few reasons. We don't teach this. I've never been to a class on optimizing code for change. I would like to. I have never seen this in a university or anything, and I think we are lacking the skills as part of it. But also, I think I've seen a culture of fear in software development, which, as far as I can tell, is pretty much entirely self-inflicted. My manager won't give me time to refactor. My manager won't give me time to write unit tests. We don't have time for this. We have to ship a feature. Almost every time I've poked at this, the manager is very, very happy to give people time to refactor, or rather not be told about it at all because they don't consider it part of their job. Now, I'm sure that's not the case in all jobs, and there are some people micromanaging out there, but I think we have a this is a highly self-inflicted problem, if not an entirely self-inflicted problem. So I would really encourage people to at least push a little bit and make a business case for why you are doing these things. If you can explain to the person who is prioritizing work, we want to make these architectural changes to the software so that we can better accommodate changes of this form in the future, and we believe it will save this much time if we needed to introduce this new feature, for example. They're, I think, much more likely to take it than if you say we want to refactor and that's the end of the discussion.
Do you have any concrete advice how to talk to your manager about that?
Ooh, I'm probably not the right person to ask this because my approach is generally be very blunt. But I'm not saying it's the right approach, but it's my approach. I think it's very important to speak the language of the person you're speaking to, right? And I'm hypocritical because we are in Germany at it's an English language conference, and I've lived in a German-speaking country for 3 years now, and I still don't speak much German. But I think when it comes to business, it's a little easier. Learn the language of the person you're speaking to. If their language is finance, if their language is about how much money we're spending, learn to express things in terms of how much money this will spend or save, right? If their language is timekeeping, if they're worried about hitting deadlines, learn to express things in terms of days and minutes and months. If their language is customer-oriented, then talk about how this will help your customers. It's not necessarily their responsibility to understand the technical reasons why you're doing a thing. Express it in a language they can understand.
Yeah, and I think that's actually very, very good advice, and so very important. And I tend to think that if you do that, then there is also sort of a filter. If you have any idea how to improve the code base or something, and if you can't express that in the language of the manager, if you can't express how it helps to reach the business goal, then maybe it's not worth it. Would you agree, or
yes, or maybe you need to think about it harder, and maybe it's not worth it. Maybe what you're trying to express is actually not that meaningful to the product. It might be meaningful to the code base, but the code base is not an asset. Go on, sorry.
Yeah, I was just wondering. So is there any exercise that you did in your workshop about that? Because probably that's one of the.
No, we were highly focused on code. I don't know how to model that. I don't know how to do a 2-hour workshop about that. I would love to figure that one out.
So maybe that's something for the next conference, or maybe for a session tomorrow.
Yeah.
But it seems that, well, obviously you're saying that this is part of the solution, and somehow you have to have. I guess that you have worked on that solution, trying to communicate that. So how did you do that? How did you learn the language of the manager? How did you realize that this is even a problem?
I cheated. I just been working in more and more very technically oriented companies, right? I work in a middleware company now, so our customers are programmers. Very simple. But I think so. I've been cheating. I think be curious. When I've worked in finance, I have tried to understand what the financial products are. I still do not know exactly how these things work, but I had a much better understanding after working in an investment bank for a year than I did at the beginning of what a stock was and what a trade was and what it means and what the regulations are.
And how did you do that? I mean, did you just talk to colleagues from the business side, or what was your approach?
Yes, but in any domain you work in, someone has written an introductory book on the topic, or there's a series of articles, or you can subscribe to a newsletter. Everyone's got a Substack now. There's probably someone doing a Substack about the topic that you're working in. But I've also found that, and this is a very English thing, is people like to talk about themselves at the pub. So if you can, I mean, it's been very hard the last 3 years because I've been working from home. I don't know about the rest of you. But if you can have a drink, it doesn't have to be alcoholic, with your colleagues, and ask them what they do. They're usually very, very happy to talk about it for hours. And if they're not, find a different colleague. There's someone out there who's willing to talk about their job for hours. And it's fun once in a while.
So the advice would be to drink more beer or coffee in your case.
I mean, it turns out they make some really, really good alcohol-free beer now, so this is not a barrier.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Anything else that we need to talk about? Anything that you want to add?
I don't think there's anything on my mind. I think you've asked me much deeper questions than I was expecting, so I've really enjoyed that.
Oh, that's great. I'm just looking at the chat and see whether there's any other things also on Twitter or so. If I can get my machine to actually do that. And doesn't seem to be the case. Anything else? No, I think actually we covered it quite well so far. So yeah, thanks a lot for joining.
Oh, it's really interesting.
And sorry for the technical problems.
No, that was probably my fault. If I go near computers, they break.
Yeah, I sometimes have sometimes I think that I can actually touch a computer and then it works again, but this time it seems that the dark side was stronger. So thanks a lot, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of the conference, and see you soon, and have a great day.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
You too.